This is what this next session is about, this beautiful mosaic of human faces and the humanity that emerges when we are seen like this, when we show up in the public spaces together. I am honored and thrilled to have my co-host and co-moderator, Ketan Patel, take the lead forward with this session on global referendum and the possibility of a global referendum and us providing a channel for a voice of humanity. Ketan?
Thank you, Mila. Thank you very much. Welcome to the panel. Welcome to the participants on this very important topic. This is a topic quite a few months ago that Garry and Mila had been exploring and had spoken to me about. And it's such an important topic for us to figure out. So we have a very experienced panel spanning academia, also international institutions and NGOs, with understanding of technology and the United Nations and so many other important topics that we need to consider to see if we can bring this to play in the world. I'm going to quote from a WAAS, a World Academy paper that explored this topic at the time that we first discussed it. And what they said was there were, at the beginning of this century, 28,000 NGOs in the whole world. Within 2 decades into this century, there are now 10 million NGOs. That multiplication is enormous and represents the level of interest that people have in reaching civil society. 41,000 of those from 300 countries are actively engaged at the international level, representing the views and voices of people. And surveys show that somewhere between 70 and 94% of these, apparently, from 27 countries, are welcomed by the people of the world to represent their views to the whole world at large. So this is already a movement. This is already a demand waiting to be satisfied. The question on the table is, how do we make that happen? And we have 3 sub-questions we'd like to pose to this panel. The first is, what is the right question? But we want to spend the smallest amount of time on that, because I think we have a good grasp of the questions and how big they are. Some of the people on the panel, though, have such experience, they will share that with us on this question. The second question is, how do we engage the community with strategies and ideas to make sure the world voice is actually heard? And the third important question is implementation. How do we make this happen? So I'm with Mila going to ask the panel to speak on each of these topics. And we'll take them in turn and ask the panel to, in a very short space of time, something like 5 to 6 minutes, lay out their stall and their views on the voice, the strategies, and really major on how we make it happen. We'll then actually convene a short session where we interchange ideas and express how we will push this forward. So let me begin with Liberato, who is president of the CoNGO, having spent 40 years working and participating in NGOs and civil society and social movements. The work that Liberato has done spans religion, faith-based social movements, with a focus really on human rights, peace, justice, sustainable development. And all of that, I think, places you, Liberato, in a good position to talk about this topic. Let me hear from you, please. Let us all hear from you.
Thank you, Ketan. So great to see familiar faces on the screen. COVID has denied us of seeing each other across the street in places where we inhabit for our work, but hopefully we will see each other again. I chose from the 3 questions that Ketan has posed to us, I chose to address the questions that matter. And I will adhere to your instructions. So as Ketan said, I'm the president of CoNGO, the Conference of NGOs in Consultative Relationship with the UN. And I have a little over 23 years of full-time work based at the Church Center for the United Nations, just across First Avenue and the United Nations headquarters. That's a Methodist building, and I represent the United Methodist Church worldwide at the UN, aside from being the president of CoNGO. My work and social advocacies for the last 4 decades were conducted in my capacity as a conscious participant in NGO, civil society, CSO, and critical social movement organizing and mobilizing. And I want to name those 3 because I think the fullness of a global referendum must take into consideration the expanse of civil society presencing and organizing. They are not just NGOs, especially those that access global institutions like the UN. There's very little of that. Even bigger in expanse are the CSOs, but much, much bigger in expanse and presence on the ground are critical social movements. Garry has heard me deliver a speech in Seoul, Korea with him on an academic setting where the academic community has already explored the role of critical social movements, those that really matter on the ground, and therefore behooves any one of us who have access to global institutions to make sure, as we are always reminded of the importance of international law. International law does not really matter unless it's expressed in municipal law by those who are working on the ground. So the privileging of NGO at the global level is something that we must look at always with humility, because the people on the ground, the critical social movements, are those that really move the international law to their significance. So in my NGO work, I have endeavored to affirm each person's voice and agency. And I gave importance to that aspect in the previous conversation where Andreas also was, which is to say that there should be no proxy representation of the voice and agency of anyone within the widest expanse of civil society. And therefore, if that is one of the critical principles of a global referendum, to get the widest expanse of the views of how people claim their voice and assert their agency, that should not be denied. And that the modalities of global referendum should make that possible, rather than the funneling, the privileging of actors that will eventually interpret what those people's longings are. And the World Social Forum, the World Sustainability Forum, there are so many other venues where the widest expanse is happening. Because a global referendum must capture the deepest longing of a people. And I think WAAS is very wise in defining the moment no longer just in the terms of hitherto globalization, but in terms that are far more planetary, cosmological in weight, and therefore the multilateral systems that we develop must adjust to the planetary challenges rather than tinker with them. And hopefully, we address a little bit of that. I submit to you that conducting referendums and the canvassing of the voice of humanity is a serious undertaking that demands full regard for the humanity and the generic capacity of people for self-worth, and regard too for the finitude and fragility of the earth. I am always amazed but equally fearful of what it would like to digitalize that experience, to digitalize the longing of people. I can only tell you that the digitalization 4 centuries ago of the history of the Philippines meant the archives of who we are and our struggles for self-determination were hidden away from us from the beautiful libraries of Valencia and Madrid and Toledo. It's the same colonial history taken away from the sub-Indian continent and brought to the libraries of London. So sub-Indian scholars, I mean, Indian scholars, the subalterns have uncovered that. So the canvassing of those longings for self-determination and for human existence must be taken into consideration, because we're not anymore dealing with the hauling of documents away from the colonial site into the colonial capital. We're talking of digitalizing. We're talking of technology that will encrypt the very soul and spirit of their struggles, which in the end they may not have eventual access to. So in the lastly, mechanisms and modalities must not be devised to give voice to people. No one is without voice and agency. But systems of domination and subjugation have, over the course of history, denied peoples the venues to speak their own voice and platforms to assert their own agency. I bid us that the global referendum must address those concerns, because they are, again, as I said, they are concerns of the deepest longing, not just for sustainability, but for the full flourishing of human dignity and human worth. I have a longer presentation, but I'll end it there. I'm excited from hearing from the others.
Beautifully and passionately put.
Thank you. Thank you, Liberato.
Yeah.
Absolutely wonderful. I mean, you have already provided the mobilizing speech for this project, and this is wonderfully put. It has been a pleasure to work with you. And I am with you, basically looking at the way we could address universal needs and aspirations. When we were thinking about this project, we thought about the imagining what that humanity's self-reflexive exercise would look like, imagining what the image of humanity would emerge through this expression, and the kind of undeniable proof of the shared vulnerabilities, universal needs and aspirations we would get, things that we would not be able to unknow once we know it. And also what it would look like to build global consensus and activate global consciousness to provide that voice for humanity across and beyond socioeconomic and political divisions. So the image that would emerge across those divides, whether that's in Seoul that you mentioned, or in Belgrade, or in Tehran, or Tel Aviv, would be the universal humanity capable of self-determination, dignified existence, and social agency of which you speak. And to tell you that from imagining that, we have gone to strategic brainstorming, building partnerships, and actually exploring ways in which we can digitalize that expression. And for that, we have reached out to a dear colleague, fellow of the World Academy, but also a fellow of the really high-level, renowned futurist think tank, the Millennium Project, that happens to celebrate 25th anniversary as well. Dr. Mariana Todorova is a futurist, visionary, strategist, and author, and was a member of the parliament at the National Assembly in the Republic of Bulgaria, advisor to the President of the Republic of Bulgaria, and associate professor at the Bulgarian Academy of Sciences. She's an extraordinary ally and expert that we have leaned on and kind of brainstormed with. What would that platform look like? A digitalized, distributed, blockchain-based platform look like? She is also the director and founder of DG Agora, of which she will speak a little bit more. And also working on this project, she launched a project called Digital Africa with the German government, connecting people from 3 capital cities in Africa, asking them how they can evaluate SDG achievement. So as you can see, we have already been prototyping, collaborating, and partnering, and working away from this centralized way of of kind of canvassing that to decentralized and now to distributed ways through blockchain to do that. Mariana, please unmute yourself and join the platform, the forum, and tell us a little bit more about the work you have already built and pave the path for our joint work with the Academy forward towards global referendum.
Thank you, Mila. I'm really excited to share this panel with such brilliant people, and thanks to everyone who represent WAAS. And I personally want to thank you to Garry Jacobs and to Jerome Glenn for the inspiration I have for you. Because I deeply believe that synchronicity with such gifted people helps to create great ideas and causes. Thank you once again. For the short time I have, I will mainly discuss two dimensions of realization of global referendum. The first one is why it is important to launch a global referendum initiative now, and second, how to achieve this goal. There are several reasons to strive to organize a global referendum. While I was politically engaged, I discovered that current model of democracy is in a systematic crisis. And there is a huge risk that institutions and governments will become illegitimate over time. People do not believe in the systems they represent, do not feel engaged, and don't think that anything depends on them. And in order for the global institutions of the future to have legitimacy, they must become decentralized and to involve more people. And the second reason is that governing itself is getting harder. Publics will demand governments to deliver security and prosperity, but in the same time, there is a growing list of emerging issues which hamper government performance. So governments will also have to decentralize the decision-making process to avoid social unrest and social revolutions. And the third reason is that almost all of the challenges that humanity will face soon will require global decisions, not those taken by separate nation states. And I mean climate emergency, ecological catastrophes, control over artificial general intelligence, nuclear weapons, space weapons. And this might be the questions that we can put on such kind of global referendum. So when I resigned from politics, I dedicated myself to finding a new model of democracy, the so-called liquid or delegative democracy, which is a mixture between direct and representative democracy. And it can be applied not only in politics, but in any sphere that requires decision-making and consensus building, like governmental bodies, political parties, huge organizations, public companies, etc. Then, together with a small team, we elaborated a blockchain-based platform because blockchain provides transparency and accountability. So we elaborated this platform for consensus building and electronic voting that introduces the so-called liquid or delegative democracy. And generally, it aims to establish a global digital community and to engage it in a decision-making process on behalf of humanity. And the platform evolves the way democracy and decision-making are functioning. It enables stakeholders to vote directly or to delegate their right to a confided person. And this is actually the way liquid or delegative democracy is functioning. So in March, we will launch our first joint pilot project with German government and an NGO, which is United Nations SDG Index. And as you mentioned, the project is called Digital Africa, and it aims to connect the citizens of 3 African capitals and to ask them how they assess the achievement of SDGs. And I also had an introductory conversation with a current US senator who would like to use the platform for daily inquiries and feedback from his humanity, but we still don't have an agreement. And the third project probably would be with the women civic movement, which wants to exercise a new manner of structuring to prove their true strength to the authorities. And they will use Agora for self-proving, self-legitimizing, and for the visualization of their real power. So this project will be small referenda themselves, and we could use them as a case studies to transfer know-how and knowledge to prepare best strategies to organize a global referendum. And I will be happy to transfer the results so that we can prepare this. And of course, in conclusion, this idea is much bigger than we are. We can't privatize it, but it needs an engine, driving force to start it and to make it happen. So in my opinion, this endeavor deserves to become one of the projects of the future of World Academy of Art and Sciences. And I'll be very glad to be involved and to continue this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mariana. Thank you very much. Let me introduce Chantal-Line Carpentier. Chantal-Line, you and I have spoken often about the information age and how social media has already demonstrated it can give a voice to and support big change. And whether we go back in this century to the Arab Spring or to the Brexit or the 2016 election or the recent attacks on the US Capitol, we see that people understand how to communicate with each other and mobilize and to achieve their objectives. But we also see that fear, anger, hate are powerful emotions, and perhaps those that know how to galvanize those voices have been very successful. In certainly the first 2 decades of this century, they've probably won hands down. Now, your career has seen you do some extraordinary things, working on the SDGs in particular, and reaching out to people who have been left behind across the world. And in your work before that with UNDESA, you worked on food security, sustainable agriculture, sustainable consumption and production, and on the 10-year plan. And you've seen how to reach those people, get that voice, and the metrics that allow us to see we're making an impact. How do you see us reaching the right people with the right voice? And everyone has a voice, and their voice is right, of course. But how do we bring out that voice so it isn't a voice of hate?
Wow, you kept the good question for me, huh? Thank you.
I did.
Only friends do
We
this.
want to implement, but not in a way, of course, that divides us all, but brings us together.
Exactly. Thank you, Ketan. No, that's fine. Not sure I have a direct answer, but let me just maybe, you mentioned the SDGs. And so let me just backtrack a little bit, because I do believe in co-creation and not reinventing the wheel and building on what already exists. So in the lead up to Rio Plus 20 in 2011, I went to the EU, and thanks to their foresight, I got, first time they didn't know me, 750,000 euro. Then I got €1 million. Then I got 1.5 million euro. Why? To actually do what we're talking about here, to reach the people that usually their voice do not get to New York, does not get to these international negotiations. And as a result of that, what do we have? The most ambitious goal this planet and humanity has ever set for itself, the SDGs, right? And presumably after the Human Rights Declaration, the most important document the UN has ever produced. Why? Because we went out and crowdsourced what the problems were for these people in their words. And this is where inequality came up. And remember, this is in 2011. Nobody talked about inequality in the media at that time. And yet we approved the SDGs, we did, not the mass media did not talk about inequality, and certainly not the private sector. And so this was included because we did reach out to those people that were left behind. Because on average, we did pretty good on the MDGs on certain areas. We did reach the goal of reducing poverty by half, but we only reached the people that were already close to the fence. The furthest behind disappear on these statistics and these average. And so and we learned from that, and because we crowdsource, we actually, and again, I'm grateful not only to the EU for the money, but for the children and youth, because they're one of my constituency, and they were already using Google Doc and webinar and all these technology that we didn't even know, the grown up. And I learned to use them, by them, with them, so we could actually have these open bottom-up process where the information would come up from the field to us. And I think we have a great result. Now, we also had a major consultation that the UN ran with UNDP and others in the lead up to Rio +20, as well as with the private sector. And we had the largest private sector presence ever in Rio +20. Now, there's another consultation that was just ran, which is the largest so far, and that's the one for UN at 75. We've reached millions of people, and 87% of them believe in multilateralism. So we need to build on that and the UN at 75 People's Declaration. So to see what is it that we as WAAS can do to build on that. Now, this is more in the abstract and the history. I have a distinctive proposal. Mila's gonna laugh because she loves me because I always have an idea somehow that pops up. So this is the Award Academy of Art and Science. And we are so lucky that not only have we had these two surveys in the past, but on top of it, this year is the recognized International Years of Creative Economy. And already you can go online, and we have a lot of people around the world already registering their event. And again, this is a bottom up, people can register the event. And we have artists, we have scientists, we had ITC folks that use the communication, it's live streaming all the way to everything else, right? And so I think we have a fantastic opportunity to blend art and science, using the International Years of Art and Science, and then use the music, the theater, the virtual one, unfortunately, but maybe they'll be a little, exciting because, otherwise we feel like we all each in our own. And I would build even further, and Ketan knows that because I repeat myself, and because I hope that eventually people will understand and we'll get forward, and that usually works. So the other thing is, I imagine that we have a platform, right, where everybody can connect to, and no matter what they do, they can register what it is they are doing to implement the SDGs, right? The richer people, the millionaires and billionaires out there, can put money, and it's a game. We gamify it, and there's a competition, right? So Bill Gates puts $1 million. Well, Elon Musk put 2 million, right? And so on. And then, but me as Chantal-Line with all with my salary, maybe, or I'm putting a little less, but I'm providing my time to support women in ITC in the digital space. And each one of us we have a worldwide competition where each one of us compete with each other, but for the good, which bring me to the attention economy. We need to take on, this group needs to take on the attention economy. Right now, it's the TikTok, it's the Amazon, it's the Facebook, and they're designing for ever more sophisticated AI, machine learning, to make us do things we don't want to do, because their goal is to make us click and steal as long as possible, because this is how much money they're gonna make. And they're using it to make us do things, buy the thing we don't want. What if we were to turn that around and use the same technology for the good, for the greater good? And to do that, each one of us has no chance against these big Goliath, but together, we actually can have a chance to do that. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Chantal-Line. Mila, you're going to introduce Jerome.
This is perfect connections here. I'm so excited and very, very grateful to Chantal-Line for always bringing rich, vibrant, and strategic advice. Jerry has been in the domain of advising Jerome Glenn, or as we call him, Jerry, in the Academy and in the Millennium Project, has been in the domain of advising international institutions, as well as national governments and all kinds of organizations for the past 25 years, practicing anticipation and foresight in a very successful way. He's the co-founder and CEO of the Millennium Project. And they have published over 53 studies that have been amazing testimony to the rich practices and knowledge that we have had, but the collaboration that I've always spoken about that we lack. So we don't lack knowledge, we are lacking collaboration. And Jerry has been on this track since 1973 with Global Futures Research as SINCON coordinator for the Committee for the Future, and also created the Global Futures Intelligence System and used real-time Delphi studies to continue global participation for collective intelligence on the future, moving toward a shared global consciousness on the future. So this is really exciting, and Jerry is a dear friend, and we've shared many conversations around the globe in different regions of the world, and discussing the context and the futures within the context in these different regions. And I'm sure he will bring both the global zoomed out insight as well as specific strategic insight for how to move forward. Jerry, welcome.
Okay, well, with that great introduction, if
That was a very dry introduction. Can I do another one quickly?
No.
To build on Chantal-Line.
Nothing else. I don't.
Lose 3 minutes.
That's all I have to say.
Quoting Jerry Glenn and speaking about the attention economy. In the future, if you are boring, you will be poor. That's my introduction to Jerry Glenn.
Yeah, I can explain that one later on. But in any case, two things I'd like to suggest. One is the use of the Academy of the real-time Delphi. There's no reason we can't just make that software available. For those that are not familiar with it, the real-time Delphi is not a usual questionnaire software. Real-time Delphi allows you to come back and edit what you said. It allows you to read what somebody else has said and then say, you misunderstood what I said. I meant to say this. And so you can have very complex conversations without personalities, because everything's anonymous. So if somebody is a private in the Army or a general in the Army, it's equal in that sense. It also has the ability to do both numbers and content, as you'd expect. But a lot of times when you rate something, let's say a 5, and somebody else rates it a 7, you may have the same mind, but you just happen to use 5 and 7. So what we do is we allow people to say, I rated this 5, here's why, or I couldn't rate it at all, and here's why. And then someone else may come back and say, well, but that question means this. Oh, well, in that way, I would rate it a 7. So you can have a very complex conversation around the world, but it's organized and coherent. And because we run the software on our Global Futures Intelligence System that's on Amazon Web Services, that means we can ramp up very fast. So there's not a limit to how many people participate, because it's just software. You just, the storage is in Amazon. They've got enough of that. So anyway, so one suggestion is the Academy could just said, out of this 60th anniversary, here are the 40 questions or whatever. And then you could even have a steering group to work over those questions so they're really clear. And then we can stick them in and you can say, okay, how important is that question? How feasible is it to get it done? How much impact might it have? Who's going to do it? What's going to be the strategy, right? So then this can be all organized and feedback and so input from Iran and Israel, and it works out, but they don't know who's who. They're just published in the final document, but they don't know at the time. So the ideas are persuasive and not personalities or ethnic backgrounds. The second idea is the use of the Global Futures Intelligence System. The idea, we all know about collective intelligence is a good idea. We want to go in that way. Okay. This one has gone as far as any that I know of in the sense of coherence. Obviously, Wikipedia is a collective intelligence vastly, way beyond anything we're doing, but they don't provide you coherence. It's not their job. Their job is to say, I want to tell you about A, B, and C. But what's the relationship of A, B, and C to X, Y, and Z? That's not their job. It is our job because we give a coherent structure and that people fill in and argue and work on it. And each element can be commented on by anybody. Every single bottom right-hand corner has a little icon, comment. And then you can hit comments above and you can see all the comments on any particular stream there. It also, like Wikipedia, has the edit function. So you can hit anything and you can see all the edits going all the way back. Now, why is it that this is the statement now? Well, because of this evolution. Each main challenge, the way we organize it was challenges, but the Academy could organize their own way, or we could collaborate on it. But each one has, what's the best news sources? So you can, so let's say if you wanted to deal with water and you wanted to deal with water in China, you, in the search thing, you hit China news and you get a distillation of all the news that day that had China and water together. So one keystroke, he can monitor a whole lot of stuff. Then people on our staff and interns and reviewers, I'm always recruiting reviewers, can then take the patterns of the news, and that goes into the next item, which is scanning. You know, what's it's like the news is like the short-term memory of the brain. Scanning is like the long-term memory of the brain. So then you can look through the scanning to see what patterns there are, and that goes into the situation. What is the situation on water or whatever it is? And if you say you know what the situation, what is it that you should know? What should you know specifically? What are the goals, the directions, the ideals? Where do we want to go with water? And what's the gap? How do we address the gap? What are the strategies and so on? Then we do this for all those different challenges. And then there's what models are available and what web resources and what data and so forth. So that's how we've organized a massively complex assignment so far. Now, I like very much what Mariana has also talked about is another way of doing that. And we can try to figure out how each one feeds the other. But that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Jerome. That's fascinating. I'm gonna make that link though straight to Andreas. Andreas BUMMEL is the co-founder and executive director of Democracy Without Borders. Is also the global coordinator of the campaign for a United Nations Parliamentary Assembly, which he helped establish in 2007, and the co-founder of the campaign for a UN World Citizens Initiative. So it seems like you're perfectly made, Andreas, to talk about this topic. We'd like to hear from you, and you've said you'll speak about engagement and flow that into implementation and making it happen. I want to add one piece, though, to your talk as you do that, which is Twitter is worth something like $45 billion or so. Facebook is heading towards that $1 trillion mark, or thereabouts now, 750 billion to $1 trillion. If the World Academy of Art and Science were to launch a platform that could hear the global voice, it would not just be an analytic platform, it would be a social media platform. It would allow people to express their view, other people to search it, and to capitalize on that. This would end up being, if supported by the World Academy, by the UN, by NGOs, by governments across the world, it would be one of the most valuable media platforms in the world. I want you to touch a little bit on the value of democracy and link it a little bit to the idea that this is not just about voice. It has competition out there, and it is a powerful tool also that is enormously valuable to the markets.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ketan, and also to the World Academy for this opportunity. And I wish to congratulate the World Academy on its 60th anniversary on this occasion. And prior to this panel, I digged out a quote that testifies how old the idea of a global referendum actually is. It is older, to be sure, than the World Academy. So the Nobel laureate Klaas Pontus Arnoldson in 1908 said the following, and please allow me to quote because it's just too nice, in his Nobel acceptance speech. And he said, "In all countries, an appeal should be issued for every adult man and woman to sign the following declaration. If all other nations will abolish their armed forces and be content with a joint police force for the whole world, then I, the undersigned, wish my own nation to do the same. So this is more than 100 years old, and I think it testifies really that this is an urgent matter given the situation the world finds itself in and the level of interconnectedness that is absolutely unprecedented. My organization, as has been indicated, is working on promoting democratic representation and participation of citizens in global governance, and the UN in particular. And Ketan, I think to respond directly to your introduction, that this idea of a, how should we call it, a social political network is really in the air. We have come across many initiatives and people individually, you know, who are looking into this. And I think it could be a task of the World Academy to form like a consortium. And this might be a first step, really. And other steps certainly have already been taken to establish such a consortium so that there is not too much duplication. We can all learn from each other. We can create synergies. The wheel does not need to be invented all the time, you know, from scratch. And in my organization, for instance, there is an initiative, a small team that is working on a global voting platform that is browser-based. Just like you can imagine it like a sandbox that would symbolize and show how global voting elections and discussion could work. But there are probably more sophisticated initiatives in this direction. But I think we also need to take a step back and establish clarity about what we are talking about. In my imagination, a global referendum is a clear, formal, official instrument, starting from the example of many, you know, of the referendum that has been established in many nation states at the subnational level and so on. So thinking about it from start to end, actually, it should be something that leads to a certain result. And in the nation state connection as an official instrument, where does it lead to? Ideally, it would lead to binding legislation. So I don't think, I mean, we need to think it through. What is it that we are talking about? Is a global referendum that we are talking about supposed to lead to world law? Is that what we want? Is it a consultation and then what? You know, are we putting forward just questions to people? And if we start from the official instrument, I think it must be a bottom-up process, which means there would have to be an initiative that is created at the grassroots level, that is put forward, that has to reach certain formalities, you know, threshold and so on. And from a certain point on, that initiative transforms into a referendum that is being held through state institutions and you know, structures. So my organization is spearheading, together with many other NGOs, a proposed UN World Citizens Initiative. And this is supposed to be an official UN instrument that allows citizens from across the world to put forward proposals that are automatically put on the agenda of the UN General Assembly or the Security Council if they reach a certain level of support. The World Academy is endorsing this proposal. We are just, you know, it's been launched 2 years ago. So I think this really ties into the idea of a global referendum. And I think we can have a two-tiered approach. One is we push for an official instrument at the UN that is available to global citizens. And second, meanwhile, we work on a self-made platform that might already exist in one way or another. You've been working on this, I realize a lot, that shows how it could function, and that might be a little bit more sophisticated. And the value of all this, of course, I mean, I don't know whether we should talk per se in principle about the value of democracy, because I think we have a consensus here that there is an intrinsic value. But materially, it is true. A a social political platform a la Facebook that has now 2.8 billion people might in fact create material value, but I think the whole starting point should be a different one as well, because perhaps the users themselves should be the owners of such a platform and not some company that is doing it for profit. We don't have much time, so I need to stop here, I am afraid. But I really hope this is just the starting point of a longer conversation and a more detailed conversation that includes all of us and others who are working on this. But to be clear, we believe in the idea of a global referendum. Totally, we believe that humanity needs to, come to the point of self-determination. Sovereignty should be rested in, in the whole of humanity. We need to cross through the political barriers of the nation state in our planetary age. And I think the global referendum is one of the things that really need to be moved forward. Nonetheless, and this is my last sentence, we need to be aware that democracy is least developed at the global stage. So that is something we need to take into consideration. I don't think that a magical leap to a global referendum is possible. We need to imagine steps. How do we get there? And in our, thinking citizens, a very modest citizens initiative that just allows people to put things in front of the UN might be such a step. And you are all invited, of course, to be part of that. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Thank you for those words. Wouldn't it be great if it was owned by the people? The most valuable asset potentially in media was not owned by a media mogul, but was owned by the people. How fascinating. João CARAÇA, sorry if I pronounced that and made a mess of the pronouncing your name. My apologies.
João.
João. Your background is in nuclear physics. You understand complexity enormously, and you understand how many data points we're trying to link in this project. Most importantly, recently, you've worked for the Gulbenkian Foundation, promoting science and culture, public awareness and engagement in science, and integrating the future through perspective into the present. And a very influential study, Open the Social Sciences, was part of your work. Please tell us, how do you imagine we will encapsulate the right questions, but how will we make sure we implement?
Well, thank you. I'm very enthralled by all this movement, these initiatives, of course, and I think this idea of a shared global conscience is really very, very, very appealing and very commendable. However, I think, as Andreas has said, that we probably have to go in steps because we are, from my point of view, I work in the future always, so I like to construct. But I think that in this area, in the area of culture, in the area of beliefs, we are still a bit far away of being able to get a shared global conscience. But by saying this, I'm not saying that we shouldn't strive and go forward. And I would start by saying that the problem, as we can see it at the moment, is that nobody can speak. I mean, we are all part of humanity. At least I'm sure that we all that sit here feel it. We are all humans, but in fact, no one can speak in the name of humanity. The Secretary General of the United Nations, well, the Pope, Joe Biden, Xi Jinping. So in fact, there is no shared consciousness. We don't see, we are divided. And so I would bring here just two ideas in order to engage. Some organizations have already started doing lots of work on this. And these new mechanisms, these platforms, everything can help in that. But really, the question of culture, from my point of view and all the things I have, is very important. Two ideas. Well, we need to contextualize universalisms. Why I'm saying this? This is the first idea. And the second idea, I'll tell you, I will reveal the whole message. The second idea is to create a world vision rooted in science. Okay, so why contextualize universalism? Because every social group which has a strong culture, and especially if it has an established religion in its center, always divides humanity in two groups, the faithful and the others. Even if one engage in dialogue and so on, in the basic structure, mental structure, there is always the faithful and the others. And why? Because divine powers extend to infinity in space and time. So we need to in fact, to be able to read universalisms in the context of history. Some people, some cultures are more akin to read their beliefs in the context of history. Some other ones are not yet there. And so this is difficult for establishing a dialogue, but it's not a difficulty for starting to go on and dialoguing with the ones that are akin to a certain idea of humanity. So contextualize first, and the second is create a world vision rooted in science. And why I'm saying this? Because we are a species, a single species, and we are on Earth. We live here. But we know, in competition with all the other living species, not only between each other. So this is, sometimes it looks very, very, very appalling. I mean, we have wars and so on, but in fact, we are in competition with all the other species. Well, this question of the virus now, I mean, all vegetables, animals, bacteria, virus, and so on, they all compete for their life, in fact. And it's only through a scientific based, rooted view that we'll be able to understand that we are, in fact, a part of a whole. And that will be the beginning. That doesn't mean that then our institutions will not divide ourselves, nations, and so on. But I think that from these two main principles, being able to see the things in context, and we know nowadays very much about how we have evolved and what is evolution and so on. And on the other side, by understanding how we have to behave if we want to be sustainable. And the sustainability, the goals are just a translation of what means to be sustainable. We have to take an attitude towards all the other species. It's not just the environment, because the environment is the other species around us and a part of ourselves. We also belong to the environment. So we have to take an idea that how to behave in this whole. Only through science we'll be able, I'm not saying that we have all to be scientists. I mean, that would be, of course, very far away from my thinking, but, through culture, we must have basic education and culture who allows us to think of at each other and see each other as somebody who is very similar to us. It's equal to us in terms of the law, in face of the law, we know, but it's slightly different. We are not all equal to each other. We have our own particularities, and we like it. We like it. I mean, we like to be like we are. Thank you very much.
Thank you, João. Thank you very much. We are obviously involved in a new process of social learning, and to activate that collective intelligence to connect it, but also to convene new social leadership for this particular initiative. These are the preoccupations that are also the great framework within which Pavel LUKSHA has been working, catalyzing the transformation of educational ecosystems at a global scale. He's also the co-founder and director of Global Education Futures, Global Change Leaders Movement of Educational and Social Innovators, professor at the Moscow School of Management, Skolkovo, while he is primarily focused on the transformation of the higher and professional education sector. I've worked closely with Pavel on the future of education and also on many other initiatives. This is a perfect opportunity to discuss the new process of social learning as we are aiming through this exercise to actually build the new social architecture. That is the ultimate goal. Welcome, Pavel.
Thank you very much, Mila. And indeed, this is such an amazing conversation we are having right now, and very promising. That I strongly resonate with what João said right now about the lack of a voice of humanity. Everybody appeals to it, but there is the actual lack of that voice, and an actual lack of manifestation of a global consciousness of the humanity that we could see as a driving force for the change that is required to address some of the largest challenges we are facing as a species. And of course, we all here in this panel recognize that the challenges that we are facing are pan-human. They do not belong to any nation anymore. They are actually, we are facing them as a species, not divided by borders. And so to create a platform that will enable us to hold conversations and to vote on options for the global governance is certainly an absolutely necessary step in the advancement of our species and in the advancement of our civilization on the planet. Otherwise, to maintain our collective governance with means that were created for a totally different situation, for the situation when we're not a planetary species, is already irrelevant. I would say it bears existential threats if we just continue on the previous models of governance. So I think we are not only talking about a referendum. We are talking about really a prototype of something that could be seen as such a model of governance, where indeed we don't use proxies, and we really have the voice of citizens of the planet collectively deciding. But I want to actually share my bigger inspiration, because we all seem to agree that we are not the only species that is supposed to govern this planet, because the planet is much bigger than only human beings, and it doesn't really belong to us. It belongs to all life. So how can we engage in those conversations? There was a very beautiful question that you, Ketan, posed, that is, what are those missing voices? I think some of those really critical voices are voices of non-human nature, that is bigger than human nature, that we are part of. And how can we, I'm just seeing, let's say, a few generations of this referendum into the future. How can we engage those voices potentially is a big challenge to me. So I'm envisioning potentially what we can call a planetary council of all beings, something that we can start certainly with a referendum of humanity. And speaking about the deepest longing that Liberato was mentioning, the biggest longing is to find a way of a human living that can work, in the words of Buckminster Fuller, for all humanity, 100% of humanity, but also for all planet, for all living beings on the planet. So this is probably the biggest longing that most humans have, that to live a peaceful life, thriving life, flourishing life, without trying to compete, but really in the abundance. And it is possible. We know that the economic models show that actually we do have technologies, we do have solutions to make it possible. But really, it's about the collective governance to carry us into that state of collective flourishing or collective thriving. And the referendum platform is probably is a really right way to get us there. But I think the word referendum is somewhat misleading, because what we are really talking about is a multi-stage or multi-format process where we have not only voting. Voting is just like a minor part of it. What really is more important is how we talk about it, how we frame questions, who frames the questions, and how we also build up on these questions to evolve our collective knowledge. So we really talk at least about 3, maybe more types of processes. So voting is one of them, but there is also a process of crowdsourcing or catalyzing the ideas in the collective space, something that Chantal-Line was talking about, some similar process. And we need a third process, the process of validation, the process of prototyping, the process of catalyzing ideas to advance. This has to be a circular or repetitive, like let's say many feedback loops process, where we learn from our ideas and we can feed them back into our collective knowledge system. So a referendum platform needs to be all that potentially, but we probably have all of the elements. Even sitting in this panel, we have people that represent voting platforms. We have people like Jerome who are very experienced in organizing crowdsourcing and future thinking in large groups. Well, I'm also doing that a lot. And we have people like Garry who hold leadership of World University Consortium, which could be one of the partners in actually doing that prototyping and catalyzing work. So really bringing those pieces together and starting feeding, let's say, this knowledge between them is probably what the referendum space needs to be. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pavel, for this designing, because this is the question of design, delivery, dissemination, and funding. And it's a huge process that we have just taken on. One addition I would make and then hand it over to Ketan is there's a process of voices in, and there's a process of voicing that back out to the humanity. So in the staging that you just showed, I mean, we right here in this room, virtual room, have the expertise of, you know, academics, scientists, politicians, policymakers, futurists, tech-savvy people, educationalists, everybody, right? This process of how you design the staging of this, what you design in terms of questions, design of technological support, then the process of dissemination of it, then that it's all unleashed as a platform and pouring in, and the voice input brings in, hopefully, like you said, needs to come in. But the voicing out is the process of translation of that. And then who will be that voice, as João powerfully said? Can the World Academy do that? That's the question. Are we the truly neutral, global, scientific and artistic representative that can unleash that voice? Of course, the UN has been wanting to do that. They know, and they've said we can't do it alone, right? Nor should we. Is that true, Chantal-Line? But can we be that? To what extent? And is there an entity that comes together to connect and convene, to voice back out that? What is that voice of new authority based on care?
Thank you,
and the
Mila.
process of translation.
Garry, your mission for us, for this panel, was to come up with the strategies and the execution. I think what we've done is begun to explore that, but clearly there is not an architecture for you. I think what the group has done is to highlight that this idea is revolutionary and therefore very dangerous too, and enormously needed. I'm going to sum it up by saying I think the group have pointed to 5 revolutionary ideas that make this compelling and dangerous and difficult to execute, but still in need of execution. The first is the idea that we are reaching as a humanity towards a global consciousness and conscience beyond borders and reaching into the edges of all our societies and the world at large. And so all those voices will be heard, not just the human voices, but all voices will be heard. And so that's one part of one of the revolutionary thoughts. The second is that this is a media platform in scale and reach that allows us to express ourselves beyond the 2.8 billion people on Facebook, because we'll get to 10 billion soon. And already there are 5 billion not accessing or nearly accessing Facebook. So this is for everybody. The third is a platform like this is likely the most valuable in the world because it's already 3 times bigger than Facebook if it's successful and reaches everybody. But because it goes beyond people, it's enormously valuable and potentially is owned by the people themselves rather than a corporation or a government or another entity. 4, it's a political and social force beyond governments. So the United Nations representing member states is bound to have some difficulties because this is a political and social force. So who should convene it, administer it on behalf of the world that will have the impartiality is a very big question. And 5th, it's a collaborative platform to catalyze change for good to solve problems. Not just to express the view, but to figure out how we solve problems together. So these are all revolutionary ideas. And this is a very big scope. And if you step back and think what it takes to launch even a small social platform, that is a huge endeavor of dedicated people and teams and capital to make that actually happen and get funded. So we've only begun the journey, I'm afraid, Garry, in the last hour. We have not really gone far enough, I'm sure. Let me hand to you, Garry, because I think you washed all the way through this one for a good reason.
Well, I want to thank you all for very, very rich, thought-provoking contributions. And I can identify with virtually everything that was spoken here. I really value the thoughtfulness here. I think you've raised all fundamental questions which need to be grappled with. I just make a few comments because there's no answer to this today. I agree with the strategy which several of you have mentioned, but Andreas, that whatever is its ultimate goal, that it should be the first right step that permits going to the ultimate goal. It doesn't attempt in one step to reach that. And that's really the kind of thinking that I would like to continue with this and other groups. And I'd like to ask you, how many of you would be interested to continue contributing on this project, or any of you who would be, to share your thoughts and work with us on it? Because we don't want to drop this. I certainly don't want to drop it. We'd like to go to the next step. And all of these questions and all of these perspectives are fair game for it. So we're not precluding anything, but we have to go further. And to me, the first key step is not obviously, nobody can own this thing ultimately, and the idea of ownership, but we have to think of a guardianship that will preserve the original spirit of it. And that's not going to be easy, especially if it becomes really valuable. And even if it's going to be owned by the world, and I love that idea. And one idea, which is not new, it's been voiced a lot around blockchain, but one thing this could do is that all the information about people is owned by the individuals, which is the alternative model to Facebook, where Facebook has everything that we give them. And that idea of a system where everybody has control over their information on it, because that's what blockchain makes possible. That's the spirit of this. that they're not giving something away. If there's value to it, it's their value. And if there's income or revenue from it, they are shareholders in it for participating. So, but that ownership and beneficiary is maybe not coterminous with management and control. And we have to think that through. Because 71 million people voted for Trump. And these are serious issues. And so I think there are a lot of issues. What I would be interested in is the next step or the first step. And what would be the role of the academy, whatever that role is, whether we step out with a concept paper or we become the kernel of something, that's to be decided on what makes the most sense. And what would be the characteristics of that core that we start with that would have the credibility, the impartiality necessary to be a credible representative for this, a custodian of this, a trustee for this. And I don't know, maybe Jerry's or Mariana knows much more about it, but the World Wide Web Consortium, and I don't know the legal status and everything, but essentially they're running, it's governing the most important real estate in the whole world today. Because it sets, as I understand it anyway, I'm not well, it sets the rules for how the World Wide Web works. We saw in the video this morning, or not the morning, but it was a long time ago anyway, I guess that was yesterday, when Jonas Salk was asked who's going to own this vaccine, his vaccine that he invented. He said, who should own the sun? The question of who should this belongs to humanity. And whoever owns it holds it in trust so that the benefits go to humanity. But that requires a lot of thought as to what that would constitute. So I think all the questions are fair game, and there are no simple answers, but a lot of good ideas have come out of this. So we would, I'm speaking we when I say we on behalf of the Academy, because I'm sure we're going to pursue it. And I'd like to go forward with a core group. I'd like to mention this on Friday and find out there are 42 other people who have been listening to this who are not on the panel. Some of them we've talked to. I'd like to know who in the Academy would be interested in being part of a group. And that invitation is open to all of you for sure. And let's think about meeting again as a small group and trying to take the issues one by one. And I think the first issue would be, which Mariana has been raising for the last 6 months, rightfully, is what is the first step? We can develop the whole vision of it and the whole concept of it. And as Andreas said, it can have many evolutionary steps, and we may not be able to imagine the ultimate steps, but let's try to chart out what the likely stages of its evolution are and be sure that the first step is a good foundation for the next ones, and that so that we're building on something solid. So I'd like to thank you for a great discussion. I don't know what time it is there, but it's almost 1 a.m. here, and
time to say good night.
Thank you all.
I won't be able to
Thank you, guys.
after this, but thanks a lot.